Okay, first of all, good evening, everybody. Welcome. I just want to make a mention. One of the students, Joel, asked me to have tonight's learning be in memory of one of her teachers, one of her rabbis, Joel Chandler from Toronto, said the following. Just want to make sure we get that. Her Rebbitzon's grandfather's name is Rabbi Mordechai Guari. I hope I'm saying that right. Mordechai ben Mordechai. He was named after his father who passed away before he was born. Wow, you usually don't hear that. And he was, unfortunately, nifter. He passed away. So we're doing it in the memory and in the merit of Mordechai ben Mordechai, as well as all those who are struggling right now, all those who are sick right now. We're hoping whatever fixings, whatever tikkunim, whatever fixings need to happen from this virus are going to happen. They'll happen soon and they'll pass us by. But also that we won't forget them, that we'll take something with us. This is something that I've been talking to several people about. And even though we hope that this does pass quickly, I think that there are a lot of spiritual openings that are available right now, that there are opportunities that are not normally available. So that's something for us all to contemplate. Maybe some things will come out from the learning that we do tonight that'll help on that level. But someone believes that there is a God, there is a governing power, there is some broader force, there is some, whatever guiding force to all of reality. So then this also has to be a part of that. And we hope that whatever needs to come from it will come from it soon. Joel, I just mentioned, I don't know if you heard me, but I mentioned that the shiur is in the memory of the gentleman you mentioned, Mordechai ben Mordechai. So we got that in. Okay, great. All right. Here we go. All right, so the centerpiece of Passover, the one item, the one symbol that really embodies what Passover is all about, right, has to be matzah. And as far as symbols go, it doesn't seem like the most exciting of them. Let's be honest. Who really loves eating that crackery, hard, brittle stuff? I mean, okay, we get ourselves excited about it, and there is an excitement on Seder night to eat it. We build up all this energy about it. Some people have a custom not to eat it 30 days before. Some people don't eat it at all throughout the year, by the way. The Gra, the Gaon of Vilna, he was known for saying that matzah is lechem min hashamayim. It's like bread that is not from this earth. And therefore, he only ate it during Pesach. Right? So some people don't eat it during the year at all, just over Passover. But, let's compare it to other foods that we symbolize during the holidays. Let's go to a good one. Most people love a latke. Even our vegan friends, I'm looking over there, tamales. Even our vegan friends can really get excited about a latke. Let's be honest, right? I guess, I don't know, what do you do about the eggs? I figured that out, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, so latkes are yummy. What do you do for that?
Use flax seeds.
Flax seeds. Okay, there you go. I knew you guys would have an answer for that. Okay, so flaxseed latkes are probably a little more enticing than matzah, just a cracker. Humintashen, on Rosh Hashanah, we dip the apple in the honey. Like that's good stuff. I mean, that's delicious, right? So, as far as what are the most tasty or exciting kind of symbols, matzah seems like it's on the low end of the scale. Even though Passover itself is, obviously a central holiday, and the whole coming out of Egypt. Andrew says matzah isn't like a cracker everywhere either. But what do you mean, Andrew? Because like the Sephardi matzah, we talked about that a little bit last week. Teimanim make delicious matzah too. This is great. Thank you for typing that in. Yes, absolutely. My neighbor is a Yemenite, and he makes his own matzah in his house. and it looks like a lafa. It's delicious. It's unbelievable. So if you have the chance to get your hands on some Yemenite matzah, my wife felt guilty eating it. She said, "I feel like I'm eating bread here. I mean, there's something wrong about this. It's, it really does taste like real flatbread that we're used to eating during the year. But that is their tradition, unlike the Ashkenazim who have this, cracker-like substance we call matzah. Anyway, yes, thank you, Andrew, for giving a plug for our Sephardi and especially Yemenite friends. That matzah is very tasty. I think as Rabbi Grodner mentioned last night for those who were here, that the first shawarma was the Hillel sandwich on Seder night, because you have the lafa, and then you have the maror, which is a little bit of harif, and then you have the korban pesach, which is the meat. So, like, delicious, it's very exciting. So maybe matzah could be a little bit more exciting than it is. But in general, comparing it to other foods that we eat during this time of year, during other holidays, doesn't seem so exciting. Yet it seems so central to the holiday of Passover that it's known really by that name. I mean, one of the names, there's 3 names for Passover, and one of them is Chag HaMatzot. It's the holiday of this unleavened bread. So what I'd like to do with you guys for the next 50 minutes or so is to just go over some ideas and try to understand, maybe on a more simple, basic level, what is matzah? Why is the Torah commanding us to eat matzah during these 7 days? What's the deeper spiritual components of it? And if we can get to it, a piece of Rabbi Nachman that quotes the Zohar. So at that point, anyone who's not for you will have to log off, but that's okay. Just kidding. I trust all you guys. Okay. So go to the sheet that I sent you guys. It's in the chat if you guys didn't get it yet, if you're just coming and joining now. I guess I'll put it in again just in case people came in late. Here we go. Although I don't know if people can read it if they came in late. Okay, that's the link for the Google Doc. Here we go. Now, let's just do this in a clear way. We'll start back with the beginning. Where is matzah first mentioned? It's mentioned in the Torah itself. In the book of Devarim, in Deuteronomy, Moshe talks about it. And he says the following: Lo tochal elav chametz shivat yamin, tochal elav matzot lechem oni, ki b'chipazon yatzatem me'eretz Mitzrayim lama'an tizkor et yom seitcha me'eretz Mitzrayim kol yemei chayech. So in English, you should not eat anything leavened with it, right, with any chametz. For 7 days thereafter, you shall eat unleavened bread. Now, the phrase that we're going to have to discuss, which is here in Devarim and nowhere else in all the Torah, is that Moshe himself calls it lechem oni. Here it translated, this is interesting, this is off Sepharia, bread of distress. Usually it's translated as bread of affliction. But the word la'anot means to afflict. But there are other meanings, as we'll see. Okay, so this is lechem oni. Because you went out from Egypt very quickly, in order that you will remember the days, Yom Tzeitcha Me'eretz Mitzrayim, the day that you went out from the land of Egypt, all the days of your life, as long as you live. Okay, that's just the passage, and it describes and it tells us what lechem oni is. So we'll try to do this interactive. Can someone help me out here? Either you can type in a comment, or you could turn on your mic and let me know, according to the passage that we just read, what's the reason why we eat matzah on Passover? What is the reason that the Torah gives us? Okay, Andrew says humility. We talked a little bit about that last week, Andrew, but I don't necessarily see anything about humility here in the passage itself. So you're going to have to do some work to, it says, Jacob says, well, it says, so we remember our departure from Egypt. Okay, very good. Straightforward. The eating of matzah is to remember that we left Egypt. In other words, the matzah would be called lechem oni, bread of affliction, seemingly because this was the bread that our forefathers ate in Egypt, right? when they were afflicted by the Egyptians were their slave masters and only allowed them to eat very quickly. They didn't have time to cook for a long time, make a whole nice meal. They had to bake very quickly so they could get back to work. So when they're in Egypt, this is the bread that they ate. And also, by the way, when they left Egypt, they had to get out in a hurry. They had to leave very, very quickly. It's kind of a question how that is, because at nighttime, Paro seems to say that they have to leave. They don't leave till the morning. In any case, very, very quickly, they're preparing this food. And it doesn't even have time to become chametz, to have leaven in it. They have to eat it very, very quickly. So therefore, the eating of the matzah that we do on Passover is very simple to get us into the story, okay? So on Seder night, we're like actors. We try to be in the play. We try to live the story. I think we'll talk about this a little bit more next week. We talk about the unique mitzvah of Sipor Yetziat Mitzrayim, of telling the story. It's the only time we have all year long that the Torah says, sit down and tell a story. So on Seder night, we sit down and we don't just tell the story as if it happened. We try to live the story. And all the items on the Seder plate are all props for the story. We have to be actors and actresses. Sherry, this is for you, right? We have to get into the role. We have to really play the part as if we're coming out. So what's the best way to get into a role, right? I'm sure there are different acting techniques, but one of them is to totally immerse oneself in the role that you're playing. You know, if you're playing a poor person, someone on the street, you go out there and you live on the street for a day and you really feel what it is to experience what it is to live on the street, and therefore you could play it on screen, right? So the idea here, just kind of extrapolating from what Jacob said, is that we're meant to re-experience that experience of coming out of Mitzrayim in a very hasty way, and therefore we eat that food, and that's supposed to evoke the emotions and the experience that happened then. Okay, that's, I think, a good reading of that so far. What do you guys think? Accept that?
Does it say anywhere that they also ate matzahs or unleavened bread while they were slaves in Egypt, or just when they departed?
That is a good question, Joel. You caught me. I added a little bit there. I'm sorry. I put a little bit of because there's a lot of questions, because already from Rosh Chodesh, from the beginning of the month of Nisan, they were told already that they're going to be leaving. And then the evening before, they're already told they're going to live. There's kind of a problem, and if you really look at the broader picture, why are they rushing? They should really already be preparing from the very beginning of the month to get ready and to get out. So one of the answers is that they prepared the food in the same way that they always did. They were under the slave master's, watch, so to speak, that whole time. So the only way they knew how to make bread, and the only way they always made bread, was to make it in this very, very hasty way. Okay? But you're right, it doesn't say that. I did add that a little bit. Okay, we go forward. Any other questions or points on that? All right. So let's see the next source here. The Talmud Bavli gets a little creative here. The rabbis don't. It's very interesting. I mean, they really extrapolate it and have some very unique ways that they're going to look at that phrase lechem oni. So if everyone looks at source number 2, this is the Gemara in Pesachim. The very end, the last chapter in the Gemara in Pesachim, has all the discussion about Seder night, and it's good stuff to look over before we get to Seder night. So Shmuel said that the phrase, the bread of affliction, lechem oni, what does it mean, lechem oni? It means bread over which one answers matters. It's bread that we talk over. When you get some nice hors d'oeuvres in front of you, you put out a glass of wine or 4, doesn't that just invite discussion and openness? So this matzah, it's meant to be discussed about. It's bread that lets you know, let's let the talking happen. Now specifically, you see here in the non-bold, it says reciting the Haggadah or Hallel over matzah. Okay, so we're going to see in a second that the very beginning of the Seder, which is all the talking that we do, right? We know it takes a lot of talking till we get to the meal, till we get to that matzo ball soup. All that talking happens with the matzah in front of us. So the matzah is supposed to kind of witness or be there on the table as we talk about it and talk over it, and it kind of invites conversation, right? It's like a very good Jewish food item, right? Talk, it's all about talking. Okay, so that's one. Where does that come from? Because the word lechem oni, la'anot, means also to answer, right? So that's where they get that from. But that's a little bit of a creative reading. Now, there's another couple answers that are given. So alternatively, the verse lechem oni is actually written without a vav, which means a poor person, right? An ani in Hebrew, a poor person. Just as it is the matter of a poor person to eat a piece of bread right? Only a section of it for lack of a whole loaf, right? He doesn't have it all. Someone who's poor takes a little bit here, takes a little bit there. I'll save that for later. I'll have this for now. So too here, he should use a piece of matzah. Alternatively, just as the manner of a poor person that he heats the oven and his wife bakes quickly before the small amount of wood that they have is used up, right? A wood-burning stove, so you have a little bit of wood, you throw that in there quick. Okay, put in the matzah, right? Put in the bread quickly. So because they only have a little bit, they want to make sure they, use it properly and don't use too much. So his wife bakes quickly before the small amount of wood they have is used up. So too here, when baking matzah, he heats the oven and his wife bakes quickly so that the dough doesn't rise. This is why matzah is called the poor man's bread. Okay, so we saw one response from the Talmud that it's lechem she'onin alav devarim harbe. It's the bread that we answer many things over. And now we see two separate readings about lechem oni being poor person's bread. In other words, the whole breaking of the matzah, right? This is one of the points in the Seder where we get to, in the beginning of the Seder, we break the middle matzah, right? So that's supposed to awaken, again, that experience, the feeling, I'm in the story. And I break that matzah, and I'm supposed to feel a sense of aniyut. Everything that we're pointing to now so far is being in that experience of being the slave, right? We're going to hopefully see that there's a part of the matzah that lets us experience a sense of geula, of redemption as well. But at least so far, the symbolism of the matzah has been the slavery in Egypt, right? Either it's the bread that sets the discourse for the meal, or it's the bread that is related to poverty per se, right? Or as we said at the very beginning, that it's the bread that evokes the sense of slavery because that's the way we had to eat it in Egypt. All right. Any points or questions so far? Good? Okay. We're going to go now to a text that you guys are familiar with and see what the Haggadah has to say. Okay, now, at the very beginning of the Haggadah, as we said, right, starts out, Ha-lach ma'anya, di'achalu avahatana be'era ba'ara di Mitzrayim. So this is the bread of affliction that our fathers ate in the land of Egypt. So the beginning of it, the whole start of the Seder, takes place over matzah. So that really does work nicely with the way the Gemara said this is the matzah, this is the bread that sets the discourse, that it sets the table, so to speak, for speaking. But when we get to the section on matzah itself, we get something a little bit different. So let's see if you guys can point out if we have any differences from what we said so far. So I'm going down to the second source in the Haggadah there. This matzah that we eat, right? We'll just do it in the Hebrew quickly. Matzah sha'anu ochlim al shuma. Why do we eat this matzah? Al shum shelo yispik bitzkam.
Rabbi, just a second. Where are the sources that you're citing?
Okay, so.
Just out of curiosity, I came in late.
No problem, Natan. Hello.
How's it going?
Glad to see you.
See you too, Rabbi.
Straight out of New Jersey.
Straight out of Compton.
Straight out of New Jersey. The hat looks like you're straight out of Compton. All right, I just shared, or Yankee Stadium. I just shared again in the chat section there, the Google Doc.
The chat section. Bing bada boom.
So everybody
okay, we found it. Excellent.
Okay.
Found it. Thank you,
Okay,
Rabbi.
good. So now we're in the Haggadah, and we're going to see what is the reason that's given there for the eating of matzah. Okay. So the matzah we eat, right? What's the reason for it? Al shum shaloi speak b'tzkam shel avotenu la'achmitz ad shnigla aleim melech malchei melchim HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'gal'am. So, because the dough of our fathers did not have time to become leavened before the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He, revealed Himself to them and redeemed them. As the Torah states, and they baked unleavened bread from the dough which they had taken with them from Egypt, for it was not leavened because they were driven out of Egypt and could not delay there, nor had they prepared for themselves any provisions for the way. Okay, so it does quote from that pasuk, that passage that we saw before, but there's a little bit of a nuance here that we're getting that we didn't get anywhere so far. Anyone see anything here a little bit different that the Haggadah seems to bring that we didn't see before, either in the Torah text itself or the Talmud when we looked at that piece?
It
Anybody
mentions
see any
God.
difference? It mentions God. Okay, good.
So
Thank
it
you,
says
Joelle.
that, yeah, it didn't have time to become leavened before the King of Kings.
That's a very good point. In other words, back, I'm just scrolling back up to the passage in Devarim. Doesn't say anything about God in the first passage. It says, "Ki b'chipazon yatzata me'eretz Mitzrayim." You just came out quickly, but it doesn't say that God took you out quickly. And l'ma'an tizkoret yom tzeitka me'eretz Mitzrayim kol yimei chayecha, in order that you remember the day for all of your life. It doesn't say anything about God's involvement in this. Beautiful. Okay, that seems significant. On the same note, I think is where you're going, Joel. It also seems to have here the concept of geula. I mean, maybe that's of redemption. That God revealed, right? Not just that it mentions God's name, but it says here that God revealed Himself. That God revealed Himself to them here. Ad shenigla alei melech malchei melchim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, v'gal'am, until Hashem revealed Himself upon them and redeemed them. It's like God cut kind of out of the picture in the first text, but all of a sudden God comes back here and He's the one doing the redeeming. That's a very interesting point. And, it's an interesting, on that note, where do we see Moshe's name in the Haggadah? It's kind of a trick question.
We don't.
We don't. Okay. Moshe's name doesn't show up at all. So here, as Moshe's retelling the story, Sefer Devarim is Moshe's retelling of everything, which is interesting that he kind of doesn't put God in at that point. We maybe should look at the broader text, Joel.
I have a question here. And
yeah.
I've not seen this before, really, in the way you're kind of bringing it out, but it doesn't say in the text that God presented Himself to the people and redeemed them, unless I really missed it.
Yes.
Like, not after the 10th plague. It's just there's the killing of the firstborn, and then Pharaoh sends for Egypt, and he says, "Get out."
Right.
And then the people, that mentions the dough before it was leavened, they take it and they leave, but it doesn't say there that, God, there's no mention of God presenting Himself to the people as it's referenced in the Haggadah. So how do you explain that? I mean, is there something that we don't know?
Yes, there's definitely something we don't know. I'm just putting my finger on that. I mean, I haven't fully developed, why that is. I think that what I was getting to when I was mentioning that Moshe's name is not in Haggadah, it's on purpose. We want to make sure that when we are talking about Seder night, that we're not thinking about Moses and Aaron and Miriam. We want to know that we're focused on God. God's the one that did it, right? He has his messengers, he has his shlichim that are involved in doing this, but really it's God. So the Haggadah seems to be trying to put that narrative forward. Moshe, he's kind of retelling the story, facts on the ground. It's kind of hard to imagine, but could it be at that point, I mean, just thinking this out with you guys as well, could it be at that point where they haven't yet left Egypt? They're not really sure that this is the Geula. They're not sure yet, right? In other words, it's not like they've walked through the sea and it's split already. Moshe's telling the experience of what happened, the facts on the ground. Get your stuff. We're getting out of here quickly. Bake the flatbread and let's make a move. Okay, as opposed to the Haggadah, which is kind of taking a more broad lens and looking at it from a wide-angle lens and illustrating to us, well, when we retell the story from this perspective, through this lens, on Seder night, we want to make sure that we understand that this is all through God's involvement, his revelation. Interestingly, maybe Jacob, to come from this, when God is revealed to a person, he or she might not know it. We might, this is kind of like maybe a deeper spiritual point here is that, sometimes God might be knocking on the door and we might not know it. I heard a very beautiful Dvar Torah today through the millions of them on my Facebook feed. It's amazing what's happened in our world today, just millions of Divrei Torah on my Facebook feed. Eliyahu doesn't knock on the door. We have to go and we have to open the door for Eliyahu Navi. We have to let redemption in, so to speak. So at this point, maybe they just don't know. Maybe they're still in it, so they can't see it. But as we look back on it, so we can see, wow, this is certainly this could only happen through God's hand.
I actually think it's the opposite of what you said, which is that no, I'm not trying to.
Natan, it's so good to have you back.
Thank you. I think it's the opposite in the sense that Moshe, he can tell the story of what he did to the Israelites at the time because they were there, so they saw the hand of God. But the rabbis are afraid that over time they might do what, say Christianity or Islam did to Jesus and Muhammad respectively, which is turn them into this quasi-deity person.
I like it.
Because if you think about it, Moshe is the most humble person in the world, right? So if he was afraid that the Jews of his time would in any way misconstrue what happened in Egypt as anything other than the hand of God, he probably would emphasize it. But he didn't.
I like that. I like that, Natan, and Andrew also likes that. And I saw some cheers from the Mali girls as well. So, in other words, it was so obvious. This is the opposite. I love it. It was so obvious to them that it was God's involvement. I mean, they did live through the 10 plagues, right? I mean, they saw, everything from, the Nile turned to blood and the frogs and the hail, which was, both a combination of fire and rain. I mean, they saw some pretty serious stuff. So it was so clear to them that it was God's involvement. Moshe doesn't even need to mention it. Whereas when we look at it from a broader lens and look back on it historically, we need to make sure that that doesn't get lost. Yeah, is that what you're saying, Natan?
Exactly.
Right?
The rabbis want to make sure that if you notice, Judaism very often, God is one of the main characters of all the stories, whereas the human characters are always shifting, and you don't really have this one central human authority figure in Judaism that's like the representative of, like, when you think of other religions, when you think of Buddhism or Christianity, you think of the Buddha, or you think of Jesus. When you think of Judaism, you think of God, right? Because the rabbis wanted to emphasize that there is no equivalent figure. All the prophets are very important, but they pale in comparison to God. But the people at the time didn't need to be told that. It was blatantly obvious.
Very nice, Nathan. I like it. I think it's great. Okay, so we offer two possibilities there for those different presentations. Either one that it was not apparent to them because they were in the midst of it and they had to open the door for it and they hadn't yet fully embraced it, or Natan's perush that it was so obvious to them at the time that Moshe doesn't need to repeat it. But for us looking back on it, we have to reiterate that point to make sure we don't miss it. Okay, great.
Can I make one more suggestion? Maybe
Yes, Jacob, please.
maybe they wrote it that way in the Haggadah because in the Torah it says that, you know, Pharaoh calls Moses and Aaron in the middle of the night and he's like, get out and get out right now. And then it says the Egyptians were like, get out, leave us, you know, leave us. And so, you know, presumably this is still shortly before dawn when I guess the women would have begun, or, you know, the persons who make the bread would have begun preparing the dough. And, you know, so they didn't have time for it to really rise. So
Right.
maybe what the Haggadah is doing, like instead of it's saying like God revealed himself, because it doesn't want to say like Pharaoh and the Egyptians like told us to get out and we didn't have time. Like it's a more elegant way of saying it maybe, but it kind of elides the fact that, you know, I don't, you know, I'll leave it be. I'll leave it be. But
Okay, great.
I won't keep arguing about it.
No,
I have
no.
a question, Rabbi. One question.
Yeah, sure.
So I got into a lot of these cooking shows, and
Oh,
one of the
gosh.
things that you do when you watch a cooking show is everyone wants to tell you how to make bread. And
Yeah.
very, very few people will tell you that you need to have bread rise for that long, right? So the fact is that if they were making dough in the morning, right, and
Yeah.
then they had to let it sit in their bags, the fact is that it would have had even more time to rise, because many times bread can simply rise at room temperature.
Right.
So
there is a whole
what does that
question about
mean?
that.
So what does that mean that they didn't have time for it to let it rise? That's precisely what they did have time. If anything, they didn't have time to let it break.
Understand. One of the ideas, it's a question, I understand. I mean, this is a little bit of a deviation, but one of the ideas is because they were moving and it was on their back, so matzah doesn't come chametz unless it's sitting for 18 minutes. But as long as it's moving, someone's moving it around, it doesn't become chametz. You could for hours and hours on end. So the idea is that they could, once it was on their backs and they were carrying it because they were moving around, somehow that moved it around and they didn't.
But that's really
become
only if you're
chametz.
kneading it. If it sits, even if the, like, let's say you put dough in a bowl, right? And then you move the dough from in the bowl from the kitchen to the living room. It doesn't stop leavening during that time. It's only if you're kneading the bread that it doesn't have time to let the gluten develop.
Right.
If in theory you were keeping it in a bag and no one was touching it other than, you know, the bag itself, it would have had time for the gluten to develop, which is
Right.
what causes bread to rise.
Right. So I understand the question. That's what one of the answers given was what I mentioned, is that because they're moving it around, so the gluten doesn't get time, it doesn't get its chance to become chametz. At least the way the Torah talks about it. The other point is the one I made to Joel is that this is the way that they had made it. They were forced to make it at all times, and therefore, even in this moment, right, with the taskmasters still upon them, so they had to do it quickly, and now they're doing it in that way to kind of be reminiscent of the experience of what the lechem is, because it is lechem oni, because it's the bread of affliction. Now the other side of this that I want to move to, and hopefully move to something more positive as well, is that here we see the element of the matzah being connected to geula, to freedom, to redemption. In other words, the way that we talked about matzah up until now was only I guess matzah has two sides, right? We talked about the side of the slavery, that part of it, all the bad stuff, remembering the experience that we had in Egypt, that part of it. Now, so to speak, the Haggadah is flipping the matzah over, and it's saying, no, that this matzah is representative, not just of being enslaved, but it's also reminiscent of freedom, of redemption, right? Just look at the text again. Right, revealed himself to them and redeemed them. All of a sudden, the rabbis want to make sure that we understand that the matzah is it's not just about slavery, it's really the bread of redemption as well. Okay, and that's what I want to move to now as well, through a couple of deeper thinkers in the Jewish tradition. Well, shouldn't say that, not deeper than the Gemara per se, but different perspectives. Okay, so the first one I want to see is Sefer Gvort Hashem. This is a book by the Maharal of Prague. You guys know me well. It's one of my favorites. This is his book that discusses all of the, or most of the texts and midrashim that discuss the coming out of Egypt. The whole book is just all the discussions about the Jewish people coming out of Egypt. It's a big book and it's very dense and very deep. And so he has a discussion about matzah here, which is something I love to share as Pesach approaches. So it's number 4 on your sheet. He says, okay, so he goes through a whole long discussion, which I cut out, about different understandings about matzah and what it means and what this phrase lechem oni is really trying to point us towards. And he says the following, he doesn't like any of these other perushim that we gave, any of the other ideas that we brought up, he rejects all of those. So he brings a new perush. He says, "Amnam perush hadavar," a new explanation. Perush hadavar ki hamatzah nikra lechem oni, hefech matzah shira. Matzah is called. Now we'll see in a second what that means, lechem oni, because it is the opposite of enriched matzah. Enriched matzah is the matzah that you find in the grocery store. What is it called? It's it has other additives or other things added to it. Forget the English translation. So someone remember what the egg matzah? That's it. Sorry. Have you ever seen egg matzah before in the store? Egg matzah is not really matzah. Why? Because it has egg in it. So it's something added. It's something additional. It's not matzah. So we'll talk about this at the end. Hopefully, just a little bit of practical issues around the matzah, but egg matzah is not matzah in the classic sense. So the Maharal says that the matzah is called lechem oni because it's the opposite of egg matzah or enriched matzah. Shekasher yesh ba shemen udvash nikret ashira, because that type of matzah, I guess they used to make it with oil or honey, other kind of flavored matzahs, that's called enriched. Ki hadavar hazeh ma'ashir halechem, because that enriches the bread. That's because the poor person, he only has himself. He doesn't have any money. He doesn't have any possessions. He doesn't have any home. He doesn't have anything. He just has himself and his physical body. So the matzah also is, right, considered like a poor person. Why? Because it doesn't have anything else in it. It doesn't have any added preservatives. In other words, this is the way that I understand what the Maharal is telling us about matzah. Lechem oni, the way to translate it is not poor person's bread, but it's poor bread. In other words, the bread itself doesn't have anything else in it. The bread is so poor, it only has 2 items. It has flour and it has water. The bread is so poor, it doesn't even have time. It's so lacking, it has nothing to it.
It sounds more like a joke or like a yo mama joke, but about bread.
Your mama's so poor, she doesn't even have time.
She doesn't even have time to let her bread rise.
That's right. She has no time. She has nothing. Right? So what the Maharal is saying is that lechem oni is something that is 100% no preservatives, no additives, no added flavors, no added colors, right? If you were to go to a health store and to buy the most whole natural food product, that would be matzah. It's got nothing in it but 100% pure goodness, flour and water. And therefore it's likened to a poor person. Now, obviously, we're not excited about, no one's saying that it's great to be poor, but he's explaining conceptually that the matzah is compared to the poor person, because the poor person has no responsibilities, has no job, has no bills to pay, has no mortgage, nothing to worry about, just getting by to the next meal. He doesn't have any responsibility or anything holding him down. So obviously the bread that would be appropriate here again for geula, for redemption, for freedom, and not only for slavery, the bread that we would choose to eat that would most represent freedom would be a bread that has no ties to anything else to it, that is 100% itself, that has no additives or preservatives. Okay? And so the matzah in this case shows us not just who the Jewish people were, Am Yisrael was when they came out of Egypt, but it's meant to be a mirror for us as well. And this is, I think, something profound. If all of us sit back and think, wow, who am I really? What is my essence? And what do other people want to make me into? What do other people want me to be? Right? Especially for the college students that are here in the group. But I guess for all of us on a certain level, trying to find ourselves still. There are other people in our lives who try to tell us who they think we should be, to try to make us into the image of us that they think we should become. And I see my mom looking on there in the corner. It's hard. It's hard with it, and I'll speak from my perspective as being a parent. You want your kid to come out a specific way. You have a certain vision of who they are, what their talents are, how they use those things, and the way they should utilize those in the world, the person they should become. You can imagine how it would be for a parent where a child doesn't necessarily want to take the path that the parent has outlined for them. Right? We all have our little rebellions, or some of us are bigger rebellions, like moving halfway across the world and living in Israel. Okay, so we all have that part of ourselves that is our true self, who we are, and we have the part of ourselves that is influenced by others. On Seder night, we have this incredible opening and opportunity to step back, and this is really heartbreaking to say it, but we have an opportunity this year to do it in a way that we never have before. Usually Seder night is grandparents, parents, kids, family, right? And we're surrounded by loved ones and experiencing this together. This year we can't do that, right? For some people it's mamash heartbreaking. They have to be, I was speaking to my sister yesterday. She has to do Seder by herself, right, with her dog. Good luck getting the dog to the 4 questions, right? I mean, that's depressing. Some grandparents can't be with their grandkids, and parents with their children. It's heartbreaking. But according to this idea, there's an opening here that I think we can all step into, which is to understand and appreciate who we are without any outside vision of who the other people think we should be. It's a chance to really be our actualized essential self, to clarify with absolute clarity that vision. That's a special opportunity that comes to us on Seder night. The matzah almost acts like a mirror and shows us not just who we are, but who we can be, free of any other additives or preservatives, any other people's visions of who we should become. Right? So again, this year when we're in a smaller group, we should take that opportunity. We should use matzah as a powerful tool to see ourselves, just as matzah is essential bread, so too we can be our essential self. Okay, that's a little bit more than just the Maharal says. I obviously extrapolated a bit, but anyone have any points, ideas, questions about what the Maharal is explaining? No. Jacob says he likes the explanation. Thank you, Jacob. Yeah, it's pretty powerful. It's good stuff. Okay, it also works nicely grammatically because it's the bread that's poor, right, as opposed to the poor person eating it. So it has a certain kind of appeal linguistically there as well.
John, can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
So what you just talked about, our perception of our child, of our friend, don't you think that can be reversed when you want to look at your parents and think, who are they? Who have they been for me for all my life? Are they who I really want them to be role models? Just a thought.
Absolutely. For sure, it's an opportunity to appreciate. And one of the main points of Seder night, and this is not, maybe we'll get to this more next week, but one of the main points of Seder night is to be able to appreciate that this is a story that I'm telling, and it's my story, and it has to be uniquely my story, and I have to put myself into the story. But if I didn't receive this from my parents, so I have no connection to it. It's just an interesting story that's disconnected. That's something, it might be nice, it might be interesting, but it doesn't have that sense of Masoret, of connected to something broader to me. So the power of the story of Passover is it's my story, and it's the story of my parents that they told me, and it's the story that their parents told them, and their parents told them, and it goes all the way back. You know, the ability to tell a story that goes back 4,000 years, and that we are chained to that and tied to that, is incredible. And to be able to appreciate, my parents told me this story and their parents told them that story, just to imagine that. By the way, if we go back, it's not so long. I mean, it's only 100 generations back to Abraham and Sarah. It's not so far that we have to think back. So you can imagine 100 people. I mean, everyone I'm sure on here has many more Facebook and Instagram, Facebook friends and Instagram followers than 100. You can imagine 100 people. 100 generations back is Abraham and Sarah. It's not so far. So our parents are key to the story of Egypt, because they connect us back to that story. And also, we get so much from them. And also, we have to walk around paths as well, with everything that they gave us, with an appreciation of that. It's okay, Mom? Okay, I'll take that as a yes. Mom and I are going to work this out afterwards. Don't worry, everything's good. All right, wait, someone wrote in the chat here. Let's see. Okay. Sharon Shani says, I like what the rabbi said about the two sides of the matzah. I like it as two sides of the same thing. Character traits too. I often think have two sides of the yin and the yang. I like thinking of matzah this way too. Shira, thank you, Shira. In other words, okay, good. In other words, we talked about matzah as having the side, the aspect of of redemption, and also of slavery, the aspect of brokenness, right? Which is for an ani, which is a poor person, and the aspect of something being whole, shalem, because it has all the ingredients that it's needing. Okay, good. Let's see. Natan says, it's interesting because Passover was the beginning of us being a nation, and being in a nation requires that duality of being both an individual and being a part of a collective. Very nice. In other words, we have to be connected to our broader story, right? Am Yisrael and family as well as the fact we have to define ourselves and understand that the Torah doesn't just want us to always go with the flow. We have to understand who we are and what our unique gift is to bring to the world. Beautiful. Okay, great. Now, there is a piece of Rabbi Nachman that I found that is just fantastic. And I'd like to try to unravel it with you guys. Number 5. He's giving his understanding of matzah according to the language of the Zohar. The Zohar calls matzah healing food. In other words, we talked about matzah so far as being the food of slavery. We've talked about it being the food of redemption. The Zohar, the mystical text, talks about it as the food of healing. So we could all use healing right now, right? Obviously, we're not talking about, using this as a homemade remedy for anything per se on a physical level, but more on a spiritual level. It's a spiritual healing. It's the holistic food of spiritual healing. Okay, so let's see how Rabbi Nachman discusses this. And as someone who's very much missing the Beit Midrash space on Monday nights, this really spoke to me. Okay, number 5. This is the bread, or this is the cake that they took out from Egypt. Hainu shematzah, that's to say matzah. Shehi bechinat machloket. Matzah represents, now not in every case and not always, but the way that Rabbi Nachman wants to talk about it, he says that in this case here, matzah represents or symbolizes a machloket, a dispute, a creative dispute. Because there in Egypt, our wisdom was in exile. And we'll speak about that in a second. Let's read a little bit more. Okay, maybe I should say it here. So it's not so hard to imagine, hopefully no one has experienced this, but it's not so hard to imagine what it is to be a slave, where your entire focus, your whole focus is on the task in front of you, and you have someone bearing over you and not allowing you to move for 1 second. You only can be focused on that task in front of you, right? This is when Moses comes back and tells the people, after the first time when the Egyptians made it a little bit harder for them after Moshe's initial coming down to Mitzrayim. The second time he comes back and he explains to them, no, God's going to help you out. This is just the beginning of the process. Don't worry. God's going to get you out of here. I'm going to get you guys out of here. They can't listen because of Kotzer Ruach. They're just too, their spirit is too tightened. Their vision is too narrow. They're in what we call in Kabbalah, mochin de katnut. I guess the best translation of this would be limited consciousness or narrow consciousness. Kind of like we talked about last week a little bit, of a very small, narrow perspective. That's who the Jews were in Egypt. They could not see anywhere out of what was the task in front of them, right? And that's what happens in Galut. Your spiritual internal processes, your ability to see the big picture. Wow, there's a God in the world that created the world. There's a God that created you. Those are very beautiful ideas that cannot be contemplated when one is a slave forced to work and to complete a task. One doesn't have that kind of internal freedom. So Rabbi Nachman is telling us that in Egypt, Dat was in exile. Their spiritual perspective, their consciousness was narrow, very, very narrow. But what happened when they came out and they ate the matzah? Ta'amu behem tam man. They tasted in the matzah the taste of manna, the manna, the heavenly bread that fell. Because as they came out from enslavement and moved from the narrow places of Egypt into the open spaces of desert, wow, everything just opened up. Reality opened up. They were able to see things that they never thought of or saw before. Right, which is symbolic of the manna, this divine bread. In other words, suddenly, oh my gosh, there's a divine being who is involved in my life. I can see that now. I can taste that through this manna, this heavenly bread. And he says, Rabbi Nachman says, Shehi b'chinat dat gadol. That is an expanded consciousness, what we call mochin de gadlut. In Kabbalah, we're told that on Seder night, everybody gets a big brain, not literally, but you get expanded consciousness. You can see, we have this opportunity, this opening to see God's presence in all facets of our life. And if you think that it's a beautiful thing because it allows us to see God's hand in our life, it's so, so important this year and right now, especially because of everything that we're going through. Because a strong sense of emunah is not just, God, I see you when the good things happen to me and all the revealed good that happens to me. Obviously, that's God's presence, but God's presence also in the difficult things, also in the painful things, also in the coronavirus, also in being, put into our homes, secluded from one another, far from one another, separated families from one another, grandkids from their grandkids from their grandparents. It's very, very difficult. But I think it's important, and Rabbi Nachman is saying in here, that mochin de gadlut, that God consciousness that we can have on Pesach, should allow us to appreciate that this is also an opportunity that's given to us by God. Nothing is stam, nothing is just happenstance. Okay, so, and that changes, Rabbi Nachman says, that changes the machloket to a machloket l'shem shamayim. And I'll just say a little bit of this outside for time's sake, and maybe we'll just read a little bit at the end. There's a difference between a machloket, a conflict or a fight, and a machloket l'shem shamayim, a creative conflict, as I like to call it. What's the difference? If I have a difference of opinion with someone, I'm right. No, I'm right. No, you're not right. It's a butting of heads, and it's an inability to be able to see the other person's perspective at all. All I can see is my perspective, and I'm totally cut off to that other person's perspective. Therefore, I'm going to bring proofs, and I'm going to fight, and I'm going to argue, and maybe I'll even get heated and say some things that I didn't mean. That's machloket, right? A machloket lo l'shem shamayim. By the way, the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, in Ethics of Our Fathers, mentions this as Korach. Korach is identified as the one who's the machloket monger, the one who's making machloket in a very negative way, okay? A difficult and painful way, a way that breaks Am Yisrael into pieces. That's one type of machloket, and that's the machloket that he says is the first, the bad machloket, when we're in Egypt, when we're enslaved, when we see things in a narrow perspective. But once we come out and we eat the man, now we're talking matzah. Now we're talking about mochin degadik, broad perspective, and that's machloket l'shem shamayim, like Hillel and Shammai, because Hillel would, before he gives his own opinion, he would offer Shammai's opinion and argue it and discuss it. In other words, Hillel still thought he was right. It wasn't that he thought that Shammai was wrong, but his presentation of it illustrated a very broad consciousness. And this is a very, very beautiful point. A broader consciousness includes the other person. It doesn't negate the other person. In other words, that other consciousness, that holistic consciousness, understands you might look at something totally differently than I do. You might have an absolutely opposite perspective on the issue that I have, whatever it is. But if I have a broad perspective, a machloket l'shem shamayim, it's something worthwhile, it's a God-centered argument, then I have to understand that your perspective is also representing something of the holistic truth. I don't have the whole truth. I have a piece or part of the truth. I have a little bit of it. I have a unique aspect of it, right? That's why God put me in the world, to express something of God's divine truth in the world. Here I am. That's what I represent. Now, doesn't mean that I give up on that. I have to hold it. But it also means that I appreciate that without your opinion, that I don't have the broader truth. And only God's perspective, so to speak, holds the whole truth. But down here, we each hold a little part of it. So I can argue my point with you, but I have a broad consciousness of it and appreciate that the two perspectives together offer something much more holistic. And that, says Rabbi Nachman, is what's representative of Matzah, Machloket L'Shem Shamayim, a much broader perspective that we get on Seder night. I see someone's chiming in here. Let's see a question. Yesterday, Rabbi Grodner also said that Eretz Yisrael, described as Rachav, right, broadness. The land of Egypt is Mitzarim, from the word Mitzrayim. It's narrow, whereas the land of Israel, especially the desert, I mean, it's just broad. But obviously, Eretz Yisrael is open and broad. Okay, so that's we can. There's a question there. We can discuss this. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to ask. So, is he saying that like they ate the matzah in Egypt, and it was like one thing, but then it's like, well, try it outside of Egypt, and it's a different thing. That's what he's saying? That's
interesting, Jacob. In other words, well, here matzah becomes a symbol. You're right, that he is saying that the eating of the same thing changes it. But what happened in between is the eating of man, is the eating of this divine bread, which seems to be saying is opening up my perspective. In other words, in Egypt, my eating and everything is just really on a very, very narrow plane. I can only see what's in front of me, because if I move, the taskmaster's going to whip me, right? I can't think of anything outside of that reality. But once I come out and I eat the man, so then I'm eating something much, much broader. And that's what matzah represents. Again, it's a mystical text, so it's a little more of a mashal. He's utilizing the symbolism of it per se, and it's a little bit moving away from the specific meaning. But right, so but we'll see the Zohar in a second, and why the Zohar seems to think that this is bread that represents peace and healing. Okay.
Well, it's interesting because if you want to think about it, even from a physical perspective, when you have these bigger breads and you make a sandwich out of like a bigger, more whole bread, a lot of the flavor from the sandwich will come from the bread itself. But if you have these thinner breads that you make like a wrap out of, or you put, where most of it is the food, it becomes more of a delivery system for what you actually want to eat. Mm-hmm. And it takes on less flavor. So it's almost as if when you have these flatter breads, you do see the broader perspective of what you're eating at the time, but that represents, more of seeing the broader perspective in general.
I like that. I like that. In other words, the matzah there, the flatbread that they ate there, it kind of hides itself, so to speak, and makes itself available for whatever you're putting on it. It's a humble way to eat. It's not just, hey, look at me, I'm a delicious challah. It's kind of like, hiding itself to illustrate what the broader picture is, what the shawarma is that's on there.
Exactly,
Like
because if you eat the way that matzah is typically eaten, or it's supposed to be eaten, is that you have the maror and you have the korban pesach, and those are supposed to be the reality. The matzah is really supposed to be the delivery system for the korban pesach, for the maror. It's supposed to, matzah itself may not remind us, but what it's a delivery system for. It's a delivery system for the maror, which reminds us of the sorrow that we had in Egypt, and it's the delivery system for the korban pesach, which is the real mitzvah, and it reminds us of the night that God saved us from the Makat Bechorot. So it's really this like humble messenger. In many ways, it represents Moshe, where he's like the messenger of God, and he's bringing all of these things to us through God. But the big important thing is what the matzah is the contents of it.
Okay, Yafeh, very nice. I think that ties in nicely also to what Rabbi Nachman says as well. But here I see that Jacob is trying to clarify. Jacob says, or he's saying that the matzah in Egypt tasted similar to the manna, not on a physical level, Jacob, because we're really in the land of metaphor here, okay, and symbolism. And yes, from a certain level, from a spiritual perspective, the taste of matzah is likened to the taste of manna, is of the man, because that bread brought them from a narrow perspective to a broad perspective. I mean, just imagine coming out from a lifestyle. I mean, maybe we can just kind of dream and imagine what this is. I've been in my house with my kids for the last 2 weeks. Sometimes have been awesome, sometimes have been challenging. When all this is gone, please God, it should be soon, we're going to run out, woohoo, right? Freedom! Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's going to be, right, we're going to dance in the streets. I mean, we're going to hug and kiss. I mean, it's going to be awesome. It's going to be amazing. It's actually, this is just coming to me now as we're talking about this, but we can really experience some of the shibud, some of this enslavement, especially those of us who have 7 people living in a space together. We can experience a little bit of what that's like in a way that we haven't before, and imagining and dreaming what that's going to be like when they open the doors again, right? And we're not there yet. So that moment, Jacob, of like, woohoo, right? That's the moment where I'm seeing things in a much broader perspective, and the world is just so much more amazing and beautiful than I ever thought it was when I was locked inside for the last couple of weeks. Now, there are openings that come from being a slave in Egypt. Maybe this is why, just going back to what Sharon Shani said about the 2 sides of it. Why do we need 2 sides of the matzah? Maybe one side is enough. Let's just make it lechem oni, the bread of slavery, or lechem oni, the bread of redemption. No, it needs to be both. There are many things that we gain from contemplation in both sides, right? Maybe this is why the Haggadah, as Rabbi Grodner talked about, has almost 2 perspectives in it. It's almost like 2 stories. It's a story of slavery and it's a story of redemption, and it keeps kind of cutting back and forth between those 2 stories. One, it's like clips cutting back. Is it slavery? Is it redemption? What is it? Yes, it's both, because both of these things offer spiritual openings that would not have been available otherwise. So as we sit inside, as we're quarantined, yes, there are very powerful spiritual openings that are available to us. And we can also dream and smile, please God, when this is over soon and people are healthy and we can go out. Yes, right? So the shift that's happening here is that moment when we all get the WhatsApp message or the Facebook video or however it is that we get it today, that the quarantine's over and we run out. Yes, thank you, God, right? That moment is really the moment that we're speaking about here. I think that Rabbi Nachman is talking about. That moment is a taste of the man, so to speak. It's a broader consciousness. Wow, things were so narrow before, and it was powerful, and I gained something. And the rabbis tell us that we had to go to Egypt in order to be able to walk in the world as the Jewish people and to survive, okay? Now that I have this broader perspective and I see God's hand in the broadness and the wide expanses, That's awesome. That's a much broader perspective. That's the perspective of Pesach that Rabbi Nachman is trying to tell us. That's the mochin de gadlut, this broad consciousness. That's what matzah is, right? And how that ties back to different types of machloket. A small-minded machloket, I'm fighting you. I don't see your side. A broader machloket, a machloket l'shem shemayim, is one that sees the totality, the bigger holistic picture, right? And that's why Rabbi Nachman goes on and he ends the piece and he says that matzah is the bread of healing. It heals our dot, it heals our consciousness. It allows us to not look at things in small, petty ways. It allows us to appreciate things. It allows that broader perspective. And this, I think, is, again, so relevant for where we're sitting right now. We need to, in the state of the world that we're in, with everything that we're seeing, and it's being bombarded by us in every moment, we need to be able to kind of step out of that and have a broader perspective. Be grateful for our health. Please God, we should all be healthy. Be grateful for the amazing people that we have in our lives, our families, our kids, whatever, all the gifts that Hashem gives us and gave us. We have a house, we have a roof over our head, all these little things, right? And Pesach is this amazing opportunity to be able to have a healing of our consciousness, to be able to appreciate those things, to be able to see the big picture, even in our homes, even locked inside. Pesach is supposed to give us this opening to see things from the broadest possible perspective. And that's why when we end, Seder night and we sing, right? Singing can only happen when one has a full heart, an open heart. Someone who is an avel, someone who is in mourning, cannot sing. But someone who is in a state of joy, like all of the Jewish people when they came across, and then Moshe led the singing, and Miriam led the singing, right? The joy just spilled out, and they sang, right? And it just came from this broader consciousness of joy and appreciation. So that's really, on a spiritual level, an opening, says Rabbi Nachman, that we can get to, that I hope we all get to, that I hope we all have the opportunity to touch. This mochin de gadlut, this refuah, this healing of our dot, this opening and healing of our consciousness that should bring appreciation, that should bring openness, that should bring healing on a spiritual level and a physical level, that should bring us close to those people that we're far from, because closeness in a spiritual sense is really who's in our hearts and who we're caring about and who we're thinking about, not who we're physically close with. All these openings are available on Pesach. So just to kind of wrap up, and if anyone has any points or questions, we saw that in general there was two kind of paths that the rabbis that we saw took. There was matzah as the bread of affliction, the bread of poverty, the bread of being enslaved. And then we saw the latter two positions, we saw matzah as related to the bread of redemption, the bread of self, the bread of true self, and also the bread that allows us to have broad consciousness, open consciousness, to be able to see the big picture, so to speak. Any points, comments, anything else before we pause for this evening? No? Okay, we have one more week, but in the meantime, I wish everyone mochin de gadlut. Thank you, Andrew. I wish everyone the broadest consciousness. And again, whatever kind of openings, thank you guys. Whatever openings we're supposed to have, Hashem should grant us those, and we should open ourselves up. And yeah, I really, really appreciate you guys being here with me, and all the challenges that we're going through, being together. We can really, really get through this together, sharing meaningful ideas, sharing beautiful ideas. And I thank all of you for tuning in tonight. And I look forward to seeing you guys next week. Next week is the last series before we pause for Passover with Rabbi Grodner on Sunday night at 6:30 Israel time, and then Monday night, me, 8 o'clock Israel time. I know that for some of you that was an hour earlier than last week. And also, we have a whole week this week of more learning going on, which is really exciting. Tomorrow is Azaria. For those of you around when Azaria is around, he's an awesome, awesome, super energetic guy. So I'm really looking forward to learning with him tomorrow. Then we have on, just pause.